The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello again. Legislative update, I believe number 5, and tonight we're going to cover at least 2 bills up in one in education and one in someplace else. But anyway, CACR 3 and HB 544, and if we have time afterwards, go over some of the bills that we got out of the Education Committee. Our next session days are, I think, 6th, 7th, and 8th of April again at the Bedford Sportsplex. So we haven't voted on, the House hasn't voted on any bills yet. This Tuesday we're going to finish all our House bills out of education, and Thursday we're going to start on the Senate bills that we got from the Senate. So the first thing, CACR 3 is, CACR stands for Constitutional Amendment Concurrent Resolution. Now for an amendment to the Constitution, you need 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and if it passes that, then it goes to the voters, and I think needs 60% or 2/3 of the voters. So it's hard to get a constitutional amendment passed. Now CACR 3, that's designed to take care of the Blaine Amendment in our Constitution, which the U.S. Supreme Court has said in other states is unconstitutional. The point is, if it fails, if it doesn't get out anyway, it doesn't really matter because the U.S. Supreme Court says it's unconstitutional. Now, what the Blaine Amendment is, for those that haven't heard of it, well, let's just start with the First Amendment, where it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. For some reason, people seem to take this as separation of church and state. It doesn't really say that. It says that the state can't tell you what religion you have to belong to. And why is that? Because remember, where did most of our ancestors come from? First settlers come from in England. They left England because England had a state religion. You had to belong to the Church of England or the Anglican Church, and that was it. So they left. And other countries in Europe were having the same problem. So people left to have their own religion. That's why it's the first thing in our Constitution. So this means that Congress cannot establish a religion or make everyone join one. Okay. Now what happened in the 19th century, around 1850 or so, a lot of Irish were coming into this country, and they were Catholics. Most people in this country were Protestants at the time. And the states, most of the states, were funding religious schools, or even the public schools. A lot of them were held in the churches. Part of the regular curriculum at that time was Bible studies. And then when the Irish came, and being Catholic, one of the big complaints was, no, wait a minute, you can't teach that. That's not the same Bible we have. So there were conflicts. And there was a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment at the time. Oh, the papists, they're going to rely on the Pope. So, and remember, this even happened all the way up to 1960 when Kennedy was running. The big argument of Kennedy. He's a Catholic. But now look at it. Pelosi's a Catholic, Biden's a Catholic. So it doesn't really matter now. But back then, I mean, it was a big issue. So after the Civil War, in around 1875, the then Speaker of the House, James Blaine from the state of Maine, tried to get a constitutional amendment in to make sure that we couldn't spend any money for public schools. The thing is, remember, he's been trying to amend the Constitution because there's nothing in the Constitution saying you couldn't do that. Okay? So, and then even, I mean, then he tried to run for president after Grant left, and the saying at the time was Blaine, Blaine, James G. Blaine, the continental liar from the state of Maine. But what happened was the constitutional amendment failed in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate. It passed the House, but failed in the Senate. So then Blaine went around the country to get the amendment put into state constitutions. So the thing was, so you got it in something like 32 state constitutions at the time, nearly every one of them, saying that you couldn't spend any money, any federal money, on any state money, excuse me, on religious schools. And you see that, so CACR says, in Article 83 of our Constitution says, and what's lined out is what the Blaine Amendment is. Provided, nevertheless, that no money raised by taxation shall ever be granted as applied for the use of the schools of or institutions of any religious sect or denomination. That's the Blaine Amendment that appeared in a lot of states. The most recent case was Espinosa versus Montana, where I guess Montana, they have a voucher system, and some mother wanted to send her child to a religious school, and they said, no, we have to blame, you can't do that. Took it to court, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that's unconstitutional. A couple of years before that in Missouri, it was a Lutheran, Trinity Lutheran Church, took it to the Supreme Court, the same thing, and said, no, that's unconstitutional. So across the country, the Blaine amendments have been cut down as not being constitutional. Yes, it would be constitutional. You can't spend money, it's like for a seminary where you're teaching priests, or that would be a religious, but just for going to a religious school, that's not an issue. And I remember somebody that lives in Litchfield now, when his daughter, they moved here when his daughter, I don't know, 7th, 8th grade, I think, and they had come from a town, a Midwestern town, I don't remember what state, but it was a small town. In that town, there were 2 schools right across the street from each other, a Catholic school and a public school. They decided to save money, they split the courses up. On one school, they taught like math and science. The other school, the elementary school, they taught like English and history. Religion was taken up afterwards. So it was a way of saving money, but still, there was money going to a quote-quote religious school, even though they weren't teaching it. So even when I was growing up in New York had a thing where, and even in New Hampshire, the law saying you have to provide bus transportation to religious schools. I don't believe St. Francis is doing that. I know they were at one point, then they didn't want to go with any schedule, and most of the kids are really coming from Manchester and other towns that going to St. Francis. But it's still a law. And when I went to school, kids rode the same bus. The schools are right next to each other. And also textbooks. When public school were updating the textbook, they gave the textbooks to the Catholic school. So also at the same time, it was very bad in this country with Catholics. Ku Klux Klan was also rioting in the streets in Maine and Oregon against Catholics and even Jews. So it was clearly religious bigotry in the 19th century. And like I say in here, all across the country, most public schools taught religion and Bible studies. And Boston, Massachusetts was funding religious schools until the Catholics said, hey, wait a minute, we want the same funding. And then they stopped the funding because they had to give it to Catholics. So the point is why we want to do CACR 3 is to get it out of our Constitution because it's a stain on our Constitution. But like I said, it doesn't really matter because it's unconstitutional anyway, and if somebody wants it, there are legal firms that will take it without paying you any money because it's already been U.S. Constitution. U.S. Supreme Court said the Blaine amendments are unconstitutional. So anyway, so that's it on CACR 3. Okay, so let me close this and okay, also sometimes you hear about 28A arguments. Wait a minute, where is it? Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Where'd it go? There it is. No, that's another one. But anyway, okay, we'll bring up the 28A one also, wherever that went. Or did I accidentally close it? Anyway, I'll pretend it later. The 28A issue, it comes out, it's in the New Hampshire Constitution. It was put, I believe, in 1982, stating that if the state mandates something, the state has to pay for it. There are some cases over the last couple of years, or since it's been in, that the state's mandating stuff and not paying for it. But every time we bring it up that it's a 28A issue, some people get it to pass anyway. But that's in the New Hampshire Constitution about it. Now, the next thing I want to bring up is House Bill 544, which is getting to be an issue across the state. Where is it? Come on. Okay. HB 544, opponents say that this bill is against freedom of speech. Now, just a little history before that. There is an RSA that says, 191:1, no teacher shall advocate communism as a political doctrine or any other doctrine which includes the overthrow by force of the government of the United States or of this state in any public or state-approved school or any state institution. That's in our laws now. Government employees are, and another Supreme Court case, government employees are only protected by the First Amendment when they are speaking as a private citizen. If their freedom of speech is part of their official job action, then they can be fired or disciplined for it. This comes from a 2006 Supreme Court case of Carcetti versus Chapalis. The Supreme Court ruled that and then see, really, even in the private sector, if you're working for a company and you're bad-mouthing the company while you're working for them, you're not going to last that long. So freedom of speech has its limits. You can't, so if you're working for a government agency, you don't really have freedom of speech. Teachers know that. Teachers don't have freedom of speech if it's supposed to be teaching history, math, and they throw in history stuff. No, they're not doing their job. Okay, now let's look at the definition of racism. Racism is the belief that different races possess distinct characteristics, abilities, and qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. Now, here is following is a course from a course being taught in some schools in the state, and is clearly racist. Students will join in honest, frank, and respectful examination of what it means to be a white person in 21st century America. We will explore many topics on race, including personal identity and power, white privilege, guilt and fragility, and taking anti-racist action. We will learn how whiteness and race were invented in the early years of our country's formation. Now, and you can go on and look at that, and it's clearly, that right there is racist. It's saying whites are bad. That's no different than saying Asians are bad or blacks are bad. It's, and here's a good example. And a question from that course, number 7, the rise of the idea of white supremacy was tied most directly to, the answer is C, Declaration of Independence. Which brings up Martin Luther King on his famous speech, I Have a Dream, in which he reaffirmed the principles and promises of the Declaration of Independence. So here he's praising the Declaration of Independence compared to that course. So I just want to bring that up and check that out and see if that's happening in our schools. It was happening in Hollis. I think they had a couple of Warren articles on it. Manchester is also looking at it. So it's just something I want to be concerned about. So that the House Bill 544 is coming up to say that, no, you can't do that. I mean, so, and the whole thing about whites invented slavery. The whites every race in the world, every group of people in the world, when they had slavery. Even Native American, the Aztecs, the Mayans, all of them had slavery. Slavery is still going on in this world in Africa, okay, and other Muslim countries where they're capturing people that aren't Muslim and making them slaves. So slavery is still going on. It's been done by every race. Even if you look at it, think about it this way: in the 1850s, a lot of Irish came to this country as indentured servants. The English was paying their way here and pretty much like selling them. You're indentured for 10 years or something. That's no different than slavery. So it's been practiced by most races across the world, and we don't know what's happening in other countries, but we know it's not happening here anymore. It was bad, but we didn't invent it. So anyway, just want to cover that a bit. So I think that covers the 2 issues. Now, like I said, in our education committee, we pretty much finished most things. Okay, a couple of things, so we'll go through some of the bills that we had passed. Now it goes to or killed. Now we'll go to the sessions on April that will, let me get those dates real fast up. But what we vote on, the remaining of all the House bills have to be done those 3 days. In other words, now remember back a few weeks ago we did the House bills that went to a second committee, and those bills coming out of the second committee, also the big thing will be the budget. Then that will go to the Senate, and the Senate votes on it, and any changes, we'll get it back and have to vote on it again. So the big thing is the 2-year budget. And remember, going through here, the calendar, and this is the latest calendar, and it says that as a reminder, please mark your calendars for April 7th, 8th, and 9th for the House session at the New Hampshire Sportsplex in Bedford. Okay, so we will be there. Don't have the times yet, probably similar. It'll probably be some times, maybe like 9 or 10 in the morning to 6 at night. And then, so normally we usually don't meet on Fridays, but in this time we have to get things done. For example, April 1st is the deadline. All House bills have to be out. Ours will be out next Tuesday in education. And then April 9th is the last day to act on House bills. And that's it. It's got to be done. Then those bills go to the Senate, and then they'll be acting on those bills, and then we'll be acting on Senate bills that come to us. So the same deadline for the Senate is the crossover date. All Senate bills have to come to us. Now, on other bills for education, this is one that your school, if you come in from another state or another school, and you're taking a course in high school, you have to be given credit for that course. So, and it makes the same as we have for the military compact. So, in other words, if you're in the military and you come from another country or whatnot, you have to get credit for those courses you took. Even they might not be on the curriculum of your high school, you still have to take credit for them. So that was passed. It'll be on the floor, passed 11-7 in the House Education Committee. So even there were some cases where people were taking VLAX courses, which is the Virtual Learning Academy, which is a charter school where you can take courses online. I know when I was on the school board here, we encouraged that. If we didn't have a course, you can take a VLAX course. Okay. Another simple bill that cleans up the language if there's an absentee in your school board right before the election and the person dies, then it makes the law the same as for selectmen. For some reason it wasn't. So, a couple of bills we retained because they should have had a financial note and didn't. Another one, and again, remember that CACR, but this one says if no public school, this is House Bill 282, if there's no public school for the child's grade in your district, in other words, if we didn't, let's say maybe, what was it, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, whenever it was, we didn't have our high school. We were sending our high school students to Hudson and some to Manchester. This makes it clear you can also send them to a private school. Now, this started some years ago in the town of Croydon, where they didn't have any elementary school. I believe no grades 1 through 5, they didn't have a school. So they were sending most of the students to Newport, but they were sending some kids to a private school, a non-sectarian Montessori school, and 4 or 5 kids. The voters approved it, whatnot. It went to court. We put in a bill, and that passed, and it was vetoed, but it passed again, and the courts ruled it was okay. So in other words, if you're a small town, you don't have a school, you can send them to a private school. On the CACR 3. There was a commission that came about last term to study school funding. They issued the report, so we have a bill to kill that. Now there's 2 bills on last year. I remember 28A issue. If the state funds something, mandates something, you have to pay for it. Unfortunately, there was a bill passed last year relative to the availability of menstrual hygiene products in schools. The law then, the bill that passed, said all schools have to provide, which they were providing anyway, but they have to be in all the bathrooms, all the girl or other bathrooms to be made available. That was clearly a 28A issue. Yes, and the argument being that, well, we provide toilet paper, but the point is we don't mandate that the schools provide toilet paper. The schools do it because it's the thing to do. The same thing here. If the schools want to do this, they can do it. But if we mandate it, then we're supposed to pay for it. So we passed the bill. It came out 11-9 saying we're not going to mandate it, and the schools will do what they are doing. Okay. Now, one of my bills relative to school district emergency special meetings. Remember that a couple of years ago, a teacher's contract failed, and the school board and the teachers union went and got a special meeting. Now, we all thought that, wait a minute, you can't do that. The law was fixed back in the late 90s saying you can't have special meetings except for unforeseen circumstances. And the judges were supposed to consider. Well, we took out the consider for teachers' contracts. The teacher's contract fails. It fails. I've been here 44 and a half years. We've had a lot of contracts fail. The point is, you go back to the drawing board and you work on it and you come back next year. And I think every case where it's failed, the teachers got their retroactive pay. But the point is, you remember what happened a couple of years ago. We didn't get your tax bill till right before Christmas because that delays, through having a special meeting. You have to have a special election, which costs money. So hopefully it passed the committee and will go to the House floor. Then the Senate gets it, and we'll see what happens. Now here's a good one. Requiring school districts submit an annual report concerning gifted students. In other words, those students that are way above. We know, and we'll end up soon on this. This is one, I remember over the years, my granddaughter in 2010 was valedictorian, but she did not consider herself gifted. But she got a lot of her information from gifted students. There was one student that was very good in math. He was a genius at math. And I know in the past we've had our high school students that were good at math going to the elementary school where they had some gifted students. So this is just a report on what your school is doing with those gifted students, how they're taking care of them and whatnot. So this will allow other schools to say, oh, this school is doing this, and so why don't we do it too? So it's just some way of let's get together and come up with some things to do. And then we retain. Okay, relative to the burden of proof in special education hearings. This was 20-0 on consent. In other words, in all hearings, the school district shall have the burden of proof, including the burden of persuasion and production of the appropriateness of the child's program or placements or of the program or placement proposed by the public agency. This burden shall be met by a preponderance of evidence. In other words, the school's got to prove it, not the parent, the school. So, and I think pretty much that wraps it up for this week. And 2 weeks from now, we'll see what some of the Senate bills have that we have, and maybe look at some other things that are happening in other committees. And that'll be right before that TV show will be right before we go to session. Then the following, hopefully we'll find some things happening. So hopefully I got you thinking about some stuff, and thank you.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.